A tutorial by Learn Fast Studios.
Welcome back. In this session, let us learn about an exception handling in Java. Let's get started. Before we get into the actual topic, let us learn what is an exception. An exception is a runtime error which causes abnormal termination in the program. Let us see one example. Let us read two integer values and find out what will be the output if you divide the first value by the second value. Let us declare the variables. To read values, we will be declaring an object for the scanner class. Since scanner class is not declared in this program, we will be importing that scanner class. Now let us read the values for the numerator as well as the denominator. Now let us calculate the result. This line of the code will help us to display what is the result. Let us save this program and then execute this program. This is very simple program which is going to read two integer values and it is going to calculate the division of the numerator value with the denominator value and then it is going to display the result. This is what we'll be doing. Now let us try to execute this code. Before that, I would like to add one more line of the code. This dot out dot println. Assume that this is the part of the code in a project, and after this, you have some more project. And before this, also, will let me include one more line of the code. Let's compile the code and then execute. Now, our project got started. And then in between the project, it is asking to enter the numerator value. Let me enter the value 10 and then denominator value, let me enter the value 3. And we'll be getting the quotient value as 3 itself since it is an integer division. And then it is executing the rest of the project. If the developer as well as an user both are the same, then they might be aware of what are the values that are possibly can be entered for the numerator as well as a denominator. Now let us try to execute the code in another way. Suppose this project is given to an unknown person. Now let us check what will happen. So project has been started. Now he is entering the value 10 and then he is also entering the value for the denominator by mistake it is a 0. Now the rest of the project has been terminated abnormally throwing a, an exception. So this exception is going to cause abnormal termination in the program. As a good Java developer, you are supposed to handle this sort of an exception. Now let us execute the code in another way. As usual, project got started and then in between it is asking me to enter the numerator. Since I am not aware, I am the user, I am not aware of the what kind of the input that I can give. I try to give the value 10.5. Immediately it stopped at that particular line of the code itself, throwing an exception. That means this, this error, what we are going to get, it is occurred at the runtime and then it is causing abnormal termination in the program, which is stopping the rest of the code not to get executed. Now let us try to handle these two types of exceptions. First exception, let us try to handle. Before we handle, we need to remember one thing. In which line of the code we are getting this exception? We are getting this exception at this particular line of the code, 27. You can observe here it is mentioned like an 27. So there is a possibility of getting an exception at this particular line number, and this is the part of the code which is going to cause this exception. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to include this in a try block. A try block is a safe container in the program in which you will be mentioning the lines of the codes which may cause an exception. So if there is any exception occurred in any line of the code in this try block, then it is going to invoke the corresponding catch block. Now, what kind of the exception it has raised? Now you can observe here. This is the exception that was raised. Now you need to write down the catch block for this corresponding exception, arithmetic exception. So how to write down the catch block? Catch arithmetic exception A. If you observe the construction of this catch block, we'll be using the keyword catch and then we'll be passing um, the exception object. Whatever the exception which is possible here, it is going to handle that sort of an exception. So now, uh, in the exception, let me write down one thing system.out.println and denominator cannot be 0. Now let us compile this code and then check what will happen. Here it is saying that since this RT is equal to numerator by denominator, there is every possibility that at this point, without calculation, uh, once there is an exception in the try block, then control will be immediately transferred to the corresponding catch block. What is happening in this case? If the division is happened with zero denominator, then automatically before it initializes the value into RES, it will invoke this catch block, which may result into the non-assignment of this RES. Hence, it is expecting to initialize this RES value. So now let me initialize that value with a 0 so that even if it is not executed in the try block, then we'll be having the default value for this RES and then JVM will not be having any dilemma to display that particular RES value. Now let us compile the code and then let us execute. Now let me enter the value. See, here also I have entered the value 0 for the denominator. Even then, what has happened? Uh, it went to the corresponding cache block and then displayed, and then it is not causing abnormal termination in the program. What what is happening here? Even after getting this sort of an error, it is executing the rest of the project also. That means your project in between, it is efficiently handling unknown errors which may be possible with at the runtime. So an exception is a runtime that causes abnormal termination because of the runtime errors. Now let us try to handle this sort of an error. Now let us execute the code one more time. And now let me give the value 10.5. It is successfully handled the divide by zero exception. But now the case is instead of 10, if I have entered the value 10.5, then this sort of the exception it has raised. Input mismatch exception it has raised. So now what we need to, this is at which line number? Line number 21. So now line number 21, this line is going to read the value into the numerator. So what I can do, since it is causing the exception, I can include this in the try block. You can also include second input also, and then let us include the display lines also. Now, each try block should be associated with one or more catch blocks. Now, let us, what shall we do? We will be assigning, we'll be including the catch block. What is the structure of the catch block? You need to use the keyword catch. And then, what kind of the exception it has to handle, you can get some inputs here. Input mismatch exception. So just I'm trying to copy that, add it here, and then create some object for that. Write down here, and then system dot out dot println display some message. Input must be an integer, and then include the same Java C. Now, what has happened? This exception subclass we don't have. Now, what we need to do? Just you need to import java dot lang dot exception. Let us try to compile the code. Sorry, java dot. Now, what is happening here? We are we have included reading of these two values in the try block. So Java JVM is estimating that in the case if none of the statement get executed in the try block, then what should be the possible initial values for this numerator and then denominator? It is asking. It is much worried about if there is a possibility of exception. So in that case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to initialize this numerator value as well as the denominator value with the initial value 1. So now let us save this code and then compare. Now we didn't get any error. Let me execute the code. Now let us try to give the value 10.5 here. Why it is not reading the second input? The minute it gets an exception, immediately it will transfer the control from this try block to the corresponding catch block. This corresponding catch block, once it gets executed, it will go further. It execute. Now, it is considering the numerator value as 1 and the denominator value also as 1 itself. Even though it does not read the value, then it is calculating the result value numerator by denominator, which is 1, and then it is, since there is no exception raised over here, it is displaying that result value and then completing the rest of it. So that is the reason why we got this sort of an, but it is not causing abnormal termination in the program. Do you understand that? Yeah. Now let us give the numerator value as 10, but denominator value as in some 5.5. Since here we got an error exception while reading the denominator value 5 point denominator value, then it is going to consider the value for the numerator and then denominator will be initialized with the default value which is 1 and the result value will be 10 itself, and then it is going to complete the rest of the project. That is how it will execute the code. Now let us see how to handle multiple exceptions. Now let us see one example where we can handle the multiple exceptions. Before that, let us take one more use case. Let us try to read a value using the buffered reader class. Syntax for including the buffered reader, you need to create object for this buffered reader. Now let us try to read the value using the buffered reader. Buffered reader is having one function, read line. Let us check that. To check What is the code inside any class? We will be using this command java p. Here you have a method called as a readline method. This readline method will enable you to read one string, and then it will return one string. Now let us use that readline method. If you observe here, this readline method is an instance method. Since none of the static keyword has been used here, and then since it is a method which is available under the buffered reader class, you need to create an object for the buffered reader class and then use this readline method. How to create object? Already we have created object for this buffered reader. So now let us try to declare a value int a equal to, otherwise let us read the string itself. String s equal to br dot read line. Now let us save this program and then let us try to compile the code. If you have to compile the code, java c dot check. If you observe here, L, uh, if you observe here, it is showing an error. Buffered reader is not, it cannot find the symbol buffered reader. Since it is available under the java.io package, we are supposed to import that. Import java.io.style. Save, again compile. Now you can observe one thing. What it is saying that there is an unreported exception IOX. Earlier in the while I am executing while I am executing that first kind of the while I compile the first example, I didn't, even though there is a possibility of the rising of exception, but it is not warning me that you have to handle. That means some of the exceptions are verified at the compile time itself. And then some of the exceptions are not verified during the compile time. They are supposed to handle in the runtime. So the exceptions which may occur, which JVM is interested in handling before, that means there is a certain occurrence of exception, then you can mention that exception as a checked exception. If you observe the code, you can get an idea about how JVM is going to segregate whether it is a checked exception or not. Here you can observe that this is the read line method, right? So what it is doing, it is by default, it is throwing IO exception. That means wherever there is an exception, you already included this particular port throws IO exception. That is the reason why JVM could able to figure out that there is a possibility of exception here, right? So now what we are supposed to do, we need to handle this exception. In order to handle the exception, then what am I supposed to do? Include that in the try block and then write corresponding catch block. What is the kind of the exception that there is a possibility? This is an IO exception, right? So I need to create object for IO exception. IO exception, and then here I'm handling system dot out dot println ie dot get message. This is the method which will help us to display what sort of the exception has been raised. Let us save this code and then compile. Now we didn't have any um, error message. We can also handle this exception in another way. In another way, what is the way that you can handle? You can also seek the help of the JVM to handle this exception. So what you do, you remove this particular part of the code and then all this part of the code. Simply, what you can do, simply ask it to handle, ask the JVM to handle it. So what you are going to do, you are going to write down throws. What is the kind of the exception that there is a possibility I will accept. So I will. Now, what will happen when this exception has been raised? Now that will be thrown to the JVM. JVM will execute the default the code block. Default code block. There is a possibility of the exception. Okay. Now what you can do? Java. In this case also, we didn't get any exception. So this is one more use case where how to use this throws keyword. But the problem here is it can only execute the default code flag rather to handle this catch. I mean to handle this IO exception. Rather, if you want to write down your own code how to handle this IO exception when there is a possibility of exception, then you are supposed to use the keyword. You are supposed to use the try catch block, and then you have to handle it. So what I'm doing, I'm just including it in the try catch block. Uh, you can also include write down the multiple catch blocks associated with the try block. Now let us check one thing. Let us delete this code and then check what will happen. Compare. We are not getting any error message or any warning message. But let us run this code. Okay, sorry. Let us compile the code. See, what is the error that we are going to get? We had a try block, but there is no either corresponding catch block or finally block. So it does not know where it has to land in the possibility of an exception. What we need to do, we need to include a minimum of one catch block or one finally block. Now let us check including this finally block. Okay, but the problem here is what it is saying, it is unreported exception, IO exception. Since it is not specifically that there is a IO exception possible with the read line method, now we are supposed to include that line of the code, catch IO exception IA, and you can leave this code inside this catch block. Now let us compile the code. You are not getting any exception, and let us try to run the code. Java. In this case, it is asking me to enter some string. Let me say hello, and then it executed this end of the exception. Now, what is the flow here? It try to read the value, and this finally block gets executed irrespective of the occurrence of the exception. Whether there is an exception or whether there is no exception, this finally block mandatorily will get executed. Now, what shall we do? Let us reposition this final block before this catch block and then check what will happen. What did it say? So the try block should be immediately followed by the catch block. This is the one more important fact that you need to remember. And then you can add multiple catch blocks. Let us see that example too. Now, uh, instead of storing that into string, let us try to store it in a Java C. Okay, we are supposed to replace this block into the same place. So again, it is showing an error that it is an incompatible string conversion. What am I supposed to do? I need to use this conversion or to convert a string to integer by using integer percent method. Now let me run the code. Let me give the value 4.5. See, now again, I got one more exception, which is a number format exception, right? That is under this java.lang package. What am I supposed to do? Here, I should also handle this number format exception. To handle that, what I am going to do, I am going to include one more cache block, and then what is the exception I am supposed to handle? This number format exception, and then I should also import. I need to include the number format exception here. I should also include import this number format exception. Import Java dot where it is located Java dot lang package. So Java dot lang dot what is the exception? Okay, otherwise I am keeping it as install. Now let me compile the code and then execute. So now let me give the value 4.5. See, it has not terminated the code abnormally, and then it is not giving me any that sort of an exception. What will be the default value? We can see that by printing the value, right? Uh, Let me write down that printing code here instead of this one. I'll be declaring A here, and then let me compile. I'll be just including that A. But the problem here is this is a local variable. This value int A will become as a local variable. Instead of that, what I'm doing, I'm defining this over here as int A and then give some initial value equal to 0. And then just remove this. Now you can observe this code. What is happening here? It is trying to read the value and then assign the value to A. If there is an exception, it is going to consider the default value 0 itself. If there is an exception of the number format, then it will come here, and then after that it is going to display the value as 0. If there is no number format error, then whatever the input value that is there, then it is going to display the corresponding value. That is how it gets executed. Now let us see Java C and then Java. Let me give the value 10.5, which may cause the number format exception. That is the reason it has displayed 0. Now let us execute one more time 54, and then it has displayed that value 50. That is how it will work. This is how we can operate this multiple try catch block statement. And then we have also seen this final. So in this session, we have learned about what is an exception. An exception is a runtime error which causes abnormal termination in the program. And then what is a try block? A try block is a safe container in which we will be writing a set of lines of the code where there is a possibility of suspicion of this particular exception. And then we also learned about a catch block. A catch block will be using the keyword catch, and then it will accept the corresponding exception object as a parameter, and then you will be writing down the code to handle that catch block. Once there is an exception raised in the try block, the rest of the lines of the code in the try block will not get executed directly. The control will be transferred to the catch block, and further it will go down. Uh, you can also handle the multiple exception here in this particular program example. There is possibility of IO exception as well as a number format exception to handle both. You can also cascade these cache blocks. And then finally, block will help to write down the closing routines. So this finally block get executed irrespective of the occurrence of this exception. That's all for today's class. Thank you. Have a great day.